Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. Today, I am lucky enough to have with me Shepperd November. Shepperd, could you give me your 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
My history is I'm a retired auto mechanic, vehicle customizer, and vehicle builder. Fire trucks I built for 21 years. Now, I have written a tell-all book called All in a Day's Work, DAZE, subtitled The Decline and Fall of the American Work Ethic. Basically, it is what I have seen, heard, and experienced up close and personal, what happened on the shop floor, the factory floor, in the meeting rooms, the boardrooms, and in the offices. What I have put in this book were things that were never meant to go public. And I'll just say right here that this is all written down from memory, because if you would have told me 35 years ago that I'd be writing a book about this, I would have said you're out of your mind. So the stories in my book, I guarantee you, will make your hair stand on end.
Well, that sounds intriguing. Are they juicy stories?
Yes, very juicy stories. I mean, as far as production and problems with coworkers have gone, yes. I have always been one of those workers who believed in doing the job correctly, doing it right the first time. And I do realize mistakes happen. But when mistakes happen over and over and over and over and over again, and I or someone like me is called to fix it, we tend to get a little frustrated. And in the working environment, the way it is nowadays is you're not allowed to point fingers. As a matter of fact, the company where I worked, and I'm not going to name them, their slogan was, be a problem solver, not a finger pointer. Well, if I'm not allowed to point out the problem, what good am I? I need to point out the problem. The first step to solving a problem is pointing it out. And they wouldn't let me do that if the problem was with a person.
That's fascinating. It kind of reminds me of problems with junior high school teachers and young children, where if they have a child, if you have a child who's got some homework issues, you have to start somewhere, and you want to start with the teacher, and then, you know, it will move from there. But sometimes the teachers don't want to talk to you, and then it's like, wait, I don't know what to do. How do I handle this?
Right.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. And the problem does go back to school. Now, I grew up in the Bronx, and these problems you're hearing with schools nowadays, I saw these problems 45, 50 years ago in the Bronx in New York City. And they are just now coming to light nationally because a lot of these policies that were used in inner city schools are now spreading to other areas of the country. You can't yell at the child. You cannot physically discipline the child. And when I came to, for example, when I lived in the Bronx, if a teacher made a move on a child, that child would say, touch me and my mother will sue you. Whereas when I came to Florida, my north central Florida town, you did something wrong, you got paddled for it.
Well, paddling is an interesting topic, but we're not going to get into that right now because
no, we're not going to get into that.
We're going to focus on writing, which is what I love to talk about. I could spend days and days and days, and that would be DAYS, not DAZE. And I understand you have written this book with a pen name of Leo Jacobson. How did you get that name?
Well, very simply, I didn't know whether this book would sell, and I'm still looking around for a publisher. But I was afraid that if I put it out there with my real name, that, of course, organized labor would want to hang me from the tallest yardarm. But Leo Jacobson is kind of a shout-out to my father. My father's name was Jacob Leo November, but he always went by Leo. In fact, he thought his first name was Leo because that's all anybody ever called him. He never realized his first name was Jacob until he was drafted into World War II, and he got a look at his birth certificate, which read Jacob Leo November. But since he'd always gone by Leo, that's what he went by. So he thought his name was Leo Jacob November. So Leo, Jacob, and I'm his son. So Leo Jacobson.
Well, that works. It's a very nice shout out. It's a good thing to do. It's always nice to think of somebody else that's inspired you. Did your dad have anything to do with the inspiration of you ever thinking you could write a book?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, no, my father was very, very defeatist. I mean, to a brief history of my family, I grew up in a family that they always believed that life had dealt them a lousy hand. And with that, well, I grew up in government housing and then later a ramshackle trailer park. So with them, it was always, let's put it this way. My family not only hated wealthy people, they hated anyone who had even a little bit more than they had. If my father owned a Ford and our neighbor down the street owned a Buick, Dad was not happy. With them, it was always tax the rich, screw the rich, take it from the rich. They got their money by lying, cheating, stealing, and standing on the backs of the poor. Now, I'll give you an example of my dad's attitude, of a defeatist attitude. When I was a child, I always loved science fiction and monster movies and like that, and I dreamed of owning a movie projector and where I could watch these movies anytime I wanted. And my father, we went into a camera store to look at the cost of one, and it was like $300, and that was back in 1973. And my heart sank to my feet. But I was determined one day I would own a movie projector. VCRs hadn't even been thought of at that point. So we got outside the camera store, and my father stopped me and said, "Do you know why I took you in there?" And I said, "Well, to show me what a movie projector costs." He says, "No, I took you in there to show you people like us will never be able to afford things like that. Things like that are for rich people. Now, you're going to make a good salary as an auto mechanic, but just know your place." So it was a very self-defeatist attitude. Of course, we all know that as technology gets better, things that were once the purview of the rich, well, now even poor people can have them. I mean, I'm looking at my outdated VCR and DVD player where I can watch movies anytime I want. So I got my dream. I mean, my childhood dream anyway.
What do you expect to accomplish with your book?
Very simple. I would like people to read this book to know that if you came from less than humble circumstances, you can make it. Now, mine is not a rags to riches story. It's a rags to doing okay story. You see, that's the way I've always looked at this. But more importantly, and let me get back to what I've seen on the factory floor, there are a lot of workers out there that I have seen who just don't care about doing their jobs. The factory where I worked, people were banging the doors down to get in. And once they were in for 2 or 3 months, they were always, "Man, this place sucks." I mean, it was always, they would show up 5 minutes late. They'd leave 2 minutes early. They'd take 30-minute bathroom breaks. They'd be late coming back from lunch. But the thing is, a lot of their quality, their work was not up to quality standards. I mean, I worked with people who couldn't read a simple tape measure, much less a micrometer. They didn't know the difference between 3/8 and 3/4. They didn't know the difference between a 1028 screw or a 1024 screw. I know you're not mechanically minded, but when you're building a $200,000 fire truck, you need to know these things. And yet these were people who didn't. And I and others like me were constantly fixing these things. I was working 12-hour days, and 8 out of 12 hours would be spent fixing defects. In fact, my last 3 years at the factory, my job was fixing defects only, and it was a full-time job.
How do you think your work experiences have shaped your writing?
Well, when I was working at the factory, I was ordered to write assembly procedures. Management said, "Well, you're pretty good at what you do. Can you write procedures?" So I wrote these procedures up, only to have management turn them back to me and say, "Nope, you have to shorten them. They're too detailed." And I say, "Excuse me, what? Too detailed? How can an assembly procedure for a fire truck be too detailed?" Well, you have to make it so that the average employee can understand it. And let me just delve into that a little bit. I was actually told by my management to dumb down my speech on the floor because I was told using what they called big words was intimidating to other employees. To give you an example, we were having a production meeting, and they circled around to me, and they asked me, okay, Shep, what are your thoughts? And I said, well, not to sound presumptuous, and one of the guys said, oh, there he goes with those $100 words again. I mean, it really broke my heart.
When you started to write this book, did you join a writer's group, or were you able to talk to other writers in order to learn how to shape it and make it so that it's functional for the average audience?
No, all I did was I started writing, and it was mostly written out of frustration, because when I would go to management and I would say, we need to fix these problems, they would tell me to mind my own business and just do my job. And I would say, but I can't do my job if you're making me do other people's jobs. And they said, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. Well, they never did. They implemented several quality programs, any one of which could have worked. And they would always say, now it won't happen overnight. And after a few years of working there, I said, look, you keep saying it won't happen overnight, it won't happen overnight. Well, for someone who's been here for 10 years, that's 3,650 overnights that it didn't happen. And yet I'm still seeing 200-item defect lists on these fire trucks that have to be corrected before they're shipped. So
who's your target audience?
My target audience is the average consumer who has ever bought a car and had nothing but endless problems out of it. But mainly, I want to target this at the business community. I am targeting this at labor, management, and government. I want them to read this book to let them know what actually has gone on the factory floor. So I want people to read this, and I'm looking to shock people. And a lot of people are going to be very angry that I've pointed out these problems. But the thing is, we can't solve these problems unless we point them out.
What do you think about the strength that it takes to actually sit down and write a book like this?
Well, it took me 10 years to write this book because I was working either one job with a lot of overtime or I was working two jobs. So work kind of got in the way. And it does take a lot of strength, and to use an ethnic term, it does take a lot of chutzpah to write a book like this. Because, like I said, a lot of people are going to get angry. This book is very controversial because I am pointing out what American workers have done in their factories.
Tell me how you expect to build your platform.
Well, what I'm hoping to do is get the book out there first off. And I do have a publisher that's interested. The publisher has told me the book is too long, that I would either have to condense it down or what I did is I carved it up into 5 sections. I am hoping to get this book out there into the business community because I want them to see where they are messing up. Because I'll bet you 10 to 1 management doesn't even know what's going on. I honestly know they don't know what's going on because they do nothing to fix the problem. So I want the average consumer to read this book because I want them to see who is building their product, who is putting their cars together. But at the same time, I want business to read this book because I want the problems fixed. I want to see the United States returned to the industrial glory days of the 1950s, minus the racism and sexism. I want to see us once again become the industrial superpower giant of the world.
Have you been able to make any connections with people in the business world who might be interested in pushing your book?
I am trying to do that, but I have sent this book to family, to friends, and I do airport transportation now. So I get to talk to a lot of people. And I've even sent this book to passengers who say, please, let me read the book. I send them the raw, unedited version. And then they get back to me and say, wow, you really need to get this out there. And I have one friend of mine who is a teacher in the New York City school system, and she says I could write the same book about the teaching profession. There are teachers who come in and just put in their time, and they don't want to do anything else. And I am sure I have talked to people in other businesses, such as the restaurant business and the shipping business and like that, and I tell them these stories, and they say, I could tell you stories. So I'm simply saying, and I don't want my country to be this way anymore. I want to see this country come back to the industrial greatness that it once was, when people actually went to work and did their jobs, and they were happy to do so. I mean, maybe I'm weird. I wake up and I say, hey, I get to go to work. I woke up at 2 o'clock this morning to do an airport run at 3 o'clock, and I was happy to do it because I have a job. And rather than looking for ways to get out of work, I want more work. I love my downtime. Don't get me wrong. I love my downtime. I think people should have time to party.
Well, that is very interesting. And while this is a writing podcast, I think I've had a bit of an education on the American workforce.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that. Now, Shepperd, tell me how people could get in touch with you.
Well, it's very simple. You can get in touch with me. I'm on Facebook right now. I mean, I'm not a social media butterfly, so to speak, but right now I'm on Facebook. Just put in, just look for me, Shepperd. It's not with an H. It's not with an A. Shepperd November, just like the month. You can find me on Facebook. You can message me however you want. And you can get me that way, and I'll be happy to message back and forth with you.
Well, all right. Are you ready to switch gears and move into our rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
What was your first car?
My very first car was a 1973 Chevrolet Vega, and it was a piece of junk.
Where was the last time you rode a bike?
Last time I rode a bike? That had to be about 10 years ago with my wife, and that's when I realized that my chronic arthritis wouldn't let me do it.
Arthritis sneaks up on you, doesn't it?
Oh, you betcha.
And your final question, what food is your guilty pleasure?
Fried chicken. Oh my gosh, real, authentic Southern fried chicken.
Would you smother it in gravy or just leave it crispy?
Oh, just leave it crispy.
All right. Well, Shepperd, thank you so much for stopping by. This has been the Florida Writer Podcast. Allison out. Shepperd November is a recovering New Yorker and new author. His book, All in a Day's Work, The Decline and Fall of the American Work Ethic, focuses on the American auto industry. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at floridawriters.net.